The galaxy had always been a place of tension, a vast expanse where countless civilizations clashed for dominance, but there was one empire that had stood above the rest. The ancient alien empire, a massive force that had ruled over countless star systems, was now crumbling. For centuries, they had held power through sheer force, their fleets a symbol of terror and their armies an unstoppable force. But time had not been kind to them. Wars had drained their resources, and over the years, their enemies had grown stronger, more cunning, and more united. Their once great fleets had been reduced to scattered remnants, their soldiers weary and broken. In the deepest reaches of their empire, in a throne room surrounded by the remnants of a crumbling civilization, the alien emperor made the decision that would change the course of history. They sent out a distress signal, one that was broadcast to the farthest corners of the galaxy. The message was short, to the point, and filled with desperation. "We need help, or our civilization will fall." The words echoed through the void, carrying a sense of urgency that resonated with every race in the galaxy. The ancient empire, so proud and feared, was now begging for help. As the message spread, the galaxy's various powers watched with a mixture of shock and disbelief. For so long, the alien empire had been the top dog, ruling through fear and intimidation. Their fleets had been unmatched, their warriors the stuff of legends. Now, they were on the verge of extinction, their empire crumbling to dust. And yet, no one acted. The galaxy had grown wary of the empire's arrogance, and though the message was urgent, it was clear to many that the time of the alien empire had come to an end. The powers of the galaxy, from the cold, calculating Masharians to the fiery and proud Zagothians, debated amongst themselves. Should they offer assistance to the crumbling empire? Some saw it as an opportunity to expand their own influence, while others were more cautious. The Masharians, always pragmatic, saw the chance to weaken a former enemy, while the Zagothians, driven by pride, refused to lift a finger for those they once considered beneath them. And then there were the other races, the neutral parties, the ones who had long been in the shadows, waiting for the galaxy's power balance to shift in their favor. All of them, though, were unwilling to risk the wrath of the Terran Deathwelders. The Terrans had always been a mystery to the galaxy. They were a relatively young species, but in a short amount of time, they had proven themselves to be a force to be reckoned with. Their history was filled with stories of battles won against impossible odds, of soldiers who fought with a ferocity and determination that no one had ever seen before. They were unpredictable, merciless, and, above all, they had a reputation for doing whatever they felt necessary to protect their homeworld. And so, the galaxy's powers, cautious of their own safety, chose not to act. They turned their backs on the alien empire's plea for help, hoping that another power would step in or that the empire would simply fade into the annals of history. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the Terrans had already made their decision. They had already responded to the distress signal in their own way. For the Terrans, there was no sitting on the sidelines when it came to matters of the galaxy's balance of power. They were never ones to stand by and watch as civilizations teetered on the edge of collapse. They saw an opportunity, but not in the way the rest of the galaxy did. They didn't see an empire begging for help. They saw a threat, a weakening force that could be a danger if left unchecked. And so, without consulting the galaxy's powers, without waiting for approval, they made the decision to intervene. The Terrans didn't offer aid, they prepared for war. The fleets of the Terran High Command were mobilized, a sight to behold in their sheer size and power. These were not the fleets of the old alien empire, fleets that had once ruled the stars with an iron fist. These were the fleets of a species that had been forged in the fires of countless wars, a species that knew how to survive and how to conquer. Their ships, massive and heavily armed, glided through the stars, their weapons ready and waiting. The Terrans had a reputation for overwhelming force, and they intended to prove it once again. In the quiet depths of space, the Terran fleet approached the shattered remnants of the alien empire. Their mission was clear: to ensure that the galaxy's balance of power remained intact, and to make sure that no one else would rise up to take the empire's place. The message from the Terrans was not one of diplomacy or mercy, it was a message of dominance. As their ships descended upon the alien systems, they broadcast their own signal, a simple one that would reverberate throughout the galaxy: help is not coming. The Terrans are here. The galaxy would soon learn that the Terrans didn't do things the way others did. They didn't offer help, they took what they wanted. And what they wanted was control. The empire that had once ruled with fear and power was now the one begging for its life. But the Terrans didn't care for mercy. They had come to ensure that no one, not even the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever seen, would threaten the balance of the universe. And so, as the alien empire struggled to hold on to what was left of its power, the Terran fleet moved closer, their massive warships dwarfing the remnants of the once proud empire. The galaxy would never forget the day when the Terrans answered the call, not with help, but with the force of their armada. Little did the galaxy know, this was only the beginning. The Terrans were not here to save anyone. They were here to show the galaxy just how far humanity had come, and how little anyone else mattered in the face of their power. The Terrans were ready to make their mark on the galaxy. And no one, not even the ancient empire that had once ruled the stars, was prepared for the storm that was about to hit. The alien empire had long been the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, their reign stretching across countless star systems. They had always considered themselves superior to other races, their technological advancements light years ahead of anyone else. Their armies had been feared, their fleets the most powerful in the known universe. But now, as the remnants of their once mighty empire dwindled, the realization hit them like a blow to the chest. Their superiority was a lie, and the Terrans had come to shatter it. The alien leaders, once brimming with arrogance, now found themselves surrounded by the wreckage of their own power. The once proud alien fleets, the very force that had kept the galaxy in check for centuries, were now little more than drifting husks in space, their crews broken and their weapons disabled. Entire colonies that had once thrived now lay in ruins, their populations either decimated or scattered. The alien empire had sent out its distress signal, but in their hearts, they knew help would never come, not in the way they hoped. The day the Terrans had made their decision to intervene was not a day that would be forgotten. The galactic powers, who had initially turned their backs on the empire, were now filled with dread. A few had hoped that some other power would intervene, but deep down, they feared what the Terrans could do. They had never fully understood humanity. The Terrans had always been a mystery. No one had ever dared to question their methods, because no one had ever defeated them. The Terran response, when it came, was as swift and ruthless as anyone could have expected. The alien empire had been given a chance to survive, to make one final plea for mercy, but the Terrans had no interest in mercy. They had their own plans, and those plans involved something far more terrifying than a simple rescue. The Terrans didn't care about saving the Empire. They cared about sending a message to the galaxy. The fleets of the Terran High Command began to emerge from the depths of space, massive warships that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their arrival was not one of diplomacy or negotiation. It was a declaration of power. The Terrans didn't seek to negotiate with the alien empire. They didn't need to. They already knew what their victory would look like. The fleets had been built for this very purpose: to conquer, to dominate, and to remind the galaxy that humanity was not a race to be trifled with. The alien leaders, in their panic, turned to each other for guidance, but there was little they could do. Their military was shattered, their fleets in disarray, and their once great empire was now just a shell of its former self. They had no choice but to send ambassadors to meet with the Terran commanders, but even as the envoys left, they knew it was a futile gesture. The Terrans had already made their decision. On the day the first Terran warship arrived in the alien system, the entire galaxy held its breath. For centuries, the alien empire had been the pinnacle of power, the unquestioned rulers of the stars. But now, as a single Terran vessel appeared in their skies, all of that seemed to unravel. The warship was a symbol of the Terran resolve. Sleek, black, and deadly, its weapons bristling with raw power. The alien ambassadors were granted an audience, but they did not hold their heads high. There was no more pride in their steps. Their empire was falling, and they knew it. The Terran commanders did not greet the ambassadors with any formalities. They did not exchange pleasantries or offer false reassurances. There were no diplomatic gestures. Instead, the Terran admiral, a stoic figure in battle-worn armor, stood silently as the alien envoys bowed before him. He had no interest in their apologies, their excuses, or their pleas. The message from Earth was simple: you failed. Now face the consequences. The alien envoys, in desperation, offered everything they had. They promised technology, resources, alliances with other alien races, even the keys to their remaining worlds. But the Terran admiral did not flinch. The galaxy's empires had underestimated humanity for too long. The Terrans were no longer a minor player in the vast expanse of space. They were now the masters of their own destiny, and they intended to remind the galaxy of that fact. The admiral's response was short, direct, and filled with the weight of centuries of human history. We didn't come for your technology. We came for control. The alien envoys fell silent, their hearts heavy with the realization that they had no bargaining chips left. The Terrans were not here to negotiate. They were not here to help. They had come to take what they wanted, to ensure that the galaxy would remember Earth's name and its place among the stars. As the Terran warships began to gather in the alien system, the galaxy held its breath once again. There was no turning back now. The alien empire had reached out for help, but what they had received was not salvation. It was a judgment. The rest of the galaxy could only watch as the first human fleet began to move into position, prepared to strike at the heart of the empire. The alien leaders, once the most powerful figures in the galaxy, now sat in their dimly lit chambers, watching as the Terran forces gathered above their heads. There was nothing they could do. Their fleets had been destroyed, their armies shattered, and their colonies fallen. They had no choice but to accept the inevitable. The Terrans had arrived, and with them came the end of an era. As the first volley of firepower from the Terran ships lit up the sky, the alien empire knew that they had miscalculated. They had sent out their distress signal, hoping for help, but all they had received in return was the full wrath of humanity. The galaxy would never be the same again. And as the Terran fleets closed in on their targets, the alien leaders understood one cold, hard truth. The Terrans were here not to help, but to show them the price of underestimating humanity's resolve. The arrival of the Terran fleet marked the beginning of the end for the alien empire. The once proud civilization, which had held dominion over countless systems and crushed any opposition in its wake, now found itself trembling in the face of humanity's might. The alien leaders, who had once ruled with such arrogance, now felt their control slipping through their fingers. Their vast space stations, once symbols of power, now seemed fragile and insignificant against the sheer scale of the Terran warships looming in their skies. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the battle for the Empire's survival unfolded before them. On the ground, in the palace where the alien emperor had once sat in unchallenged authority, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The alien leaders gathered in a dimly lit chamber, their eyes glued to the screens that displayed the incoming Terran fleet. They could no longer pretend that their empire was invulnerable. They had believed, for so long, that nothing could threaten their rule. But now, they were facing something far more terrifying than any opponent they had encountered before. As the Terran warships entered the alien system, their approach was slow but deliberate. Each ship, a towering behemoth in the cold void of space, carried with it the weight of humanity's resolve. The alien fleets, still battered and broken from the previous battles, were no match for the overwhelming power of the Terrans. Every alien ship that attempted to defend the system was destroyed in seconds. The Terran fleet didn't waste time with petty skirmishes. They obliterated any resistance that came their way, leaving nothing but debris and shattered remnants in their wake. The alien emperor, who had once commanded entire armies with a flick of his hand, now found himself scrambling for a solution. The royal palace was filled with frantic discussions as the last few loyal generals argued over what to do. But deep down, they all knew it was over. The Terrans were not here to negotiate. They weren't interested in treaties or alliances. The message had been clear from the moment the first warship appeared. Earth's Terran fleet had come for one thing and one thing only: complete dominance. Desperation began to set in. The alien emperor, once a figure of untouchable power, now sought a way out. They had been warned about the Terrans, but never in their wildest dreams had they imagined this level of force. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. The alien leaders huddled together, trying to devise a plan, but their minds raced in circles. There was nothing left to fight with. Their last remaining fleets were scattered and broken, their last reserves depleted. The Terran warships were not only superior in firepower, they were also masters of strategy and ruthlessness. The Emperor's eyes flickered to the screen again, where the Terran flagship, a gargantuan ship with a black hull, was slowly approaching the capital planet. The massive warship was like a shadow in the sky, its weapons bristling with power. The Emperor felt a cold sweat break out on their brow. They had heard the stories, the rumors of the Terran Deathwelders, how they fought with an unmatched ferocity, how they would rather see the galaxy burn than back down from a fight. And now, those rumors had come to life. The alien Emperor knew that any last-minute plea for mercy would be in vain. The Terrans had made it clear. They didn't come to save the alien empire. They came to show the galaxy what happened when you challenged humanity. The plea for help had been sent out, but all it had done was open the door for the Terrans to claim their place as the galaxy's new rulers. As the first waves of Terran ships entered the capital's orbit, the alien Emperor was forced to make a choice. They could either surrender and watch their empire be dismantled, or they could fight to the bitter end and hope for some miracle. But deep down, they knew the truth. There was no more fight left in them. The once mighty empire that had conquered and enslaved countless civilizations was now just a hollow shell, a crumbling relic of its former glory. In the heart of the capital, the Terran forces began their invasion. Thousands of boots hit the ground, their sharp, synchronized movements echoing through the empty streets. The Terran soldiers, clad in their dark, imposing armor, marched with purpose, their weapons ready. The aliens who had once controlled the planet's surface now found themselves fleeing, scrambling to save what little they could of their broken empire. It was a humbling sight. Alien civilians who had once lived in fear of their own leaders now looked to the Terrans with a mix of awe and terror. They knew what the Terrans were capable of, and they feared what might come next. The invasion was swift, as expected. No alien resistance was enough to stop the Terrans. In mere hours, entire districts were taken. The Terran forces moved with surgical precision, neutralizing any threats with ruthless efficiency. The alien defenders, those few who still dared to stand, were quickly overwhelmed. The once proud capital city, the heart of the alien empire, was now a battlefield, with Terran forces sweeping through it like an unstoppable tide. Inside the Emperor's palace, the last remnants of the alien leadership made their final stand. The alien Emperor, no longer the proud ruler, sat in silence, staring at the screen that displayed the Terran warships in orbit. The finality of their situation was overwhelming. They had once been invincible, their empire a force that no one dared to challenge. But now, as they faced the Terran Armada, they realized that all their power, all their wealth, meant nothing in the face of humanity's fury. The Terrans had not come to negotiate. They had not come to help. They had come to take control. And the galaxy would never forget the day when the alien empire fell, not to some other civilization, but to the most unexpected force of all, humanity. The Terran fleet hovered above the capital, their weapons poised to strike. But the alien Emperor, in their final moments of desperation, had one last request. A single transmission sent to the Terran flagship. "We surrender," the message read, "but know this, we never expected you to be the ones who would defeat us." It was a simple message, one that encapsulated the overwhelming truth of the moment. Humanity had not just come to claim victory. They had come to make sure the galaxy knew who truly held the power. And the universe, in that moment, understood one undeniable truth. The Terrans were the galaxy's new masters. The message of surrender from the alien Emperor echoed through the Terran fleet, but it was met with silence. The Terran admiral, sitting in the command center of the flagship, read the transmission with a calm, measured expression. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, no hint of triumph. He had seen countless victories before, but this was not just a conquest. This was a statement, an undeniable reminder to the galaxy of who ruled the stars. The Terran admiral was not interested in words or pleas. He had already made his decision, and it was final. "Proceed with the mission," he ordered, his voice steady, as though he were giving any other command. The Terrans had come not to negotiate but to show the galaxy that mercy was not something they handed out lightly. It was not the alien empire's surrender that mattered. It was the lesson it would teach every other power in the galaxy. As the alien capital planet trembled under the shadow of the Terran fleet, the remaining leadership, now completely isolated, made one last attempt to reclaim some shred of dignity. Their soldiers had all but abandoned them, their generals either captured or dead. The palace itself had become a prison, its once grand halls now filled with a palpable sense of defeat. The alien emperor, surrounded by a handful of loyalists, retreated to their private chambers, watching helplessly as the Terrans advanced relentlessly through their world. The once glorious empire that had ruled the galaxy was now crumbling at their feet. The Terran soldiers, relentlessly efficient, continued their march through the capital, sweeping through every district with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Each street they took was another victory, and each building they entered carried with it the bitter reality for the alien empire. The city, once a symbol of strength, was now a battlefield, a reflection of the empire's shattered dominance. The alien emperor, now a broken figure, looked out through the palace windows at the Terran warships in orbit. They had seen this coming for a long time, but they had never imagined that the fall would be so swift, so absolute. Their empire had once been the pinnacle of power, their fleets unmatched, their armies invincible. Now, there was nothing left. No allies, no hope. The galaxy was watching, and what they were witnessing was the death of an empire. A transmission came through to the Emperor's private chambers. The voice that spoke was cold, impersonal, and unforgiving. It was the voice of the Terran admiral. "Your empire is finished," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "We've seen enough of your kind to know that your time has passed. The galaxy will never again fear you." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. There was no plea for mercy, no bargaining for survival. The Terrans had no interest in anything but their total dominance, and the Emperor knew, deep down, that nothing would stop them. The time for bargains was over. The message was clear: Earth's Terran forces would not simply take control of the Empire's systems. They would dismantle everything the alien empire had built. They would erase the name of the once feared empire from the galaxy's history, and they would leave nothing but a trail of destruction in their wake. There would be no rebuilding, no retribution. The alien empire would fall, and the Terrans would rise in its place. The alien emperor tried to rally the last of their remaining generals, but there was no one left to fight. Their armies were broken, their fleets scattered and decimated. There were no ships to deploy, no soldiers to command. The alien species had failed in every possible way. The Emperor's reign, once so unshakable, had collapsed in a matter of days, if not hours. And now, as the final moments of their rule slipped away, the Emperor had to accept the truth. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Terran admiral's voice continued, each word a reminder of the Empire's impending collapse. "There will be no mercy for those who oppose us. Earth has chosen its place among the stars, and no one will challenge it." As the Admiral's words echoed in the Emperor's ears, the reality of the situation settled in. There was no victory to be had here, no way to fight back. The alien empire had sent out a plea for help, but the response had not been one of rescue. It had been one of domination. The Terrans had arrived not as allies, but as conquerors. They had answered the call, but they had no interest in saving the empire. They had come to take it for themselves. Outside the palace, the Terran soldiers were already moving into the final stages of their operation. The alien capital was falling, and with it, any remaining hopes of resistance. The Empire's leadership had been completely neutralized, and the remnants of their armies scattered or defeated. The Terrans had made sure that no one would rise up again to challenge their authority. As the Emperor looked out over the shattered world they had once ruled, they understood that the fall of the alien empire was not just about military defeat, it was about humiliation. The Terrans hadn't come to fight for a title, or for control of the Empire's resources. They had come to destroy the very foundation of the alien civilization's power. They had come to erase it, to ensure that no one would ever mistake the Terrans for anything other than the true masters of the galaxy. The Emperor, in their final moments of clarity, realized the full extent of the Terran threat. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long. They had assumed the Terrans were just another species, one to be dismissed, one to be ignored. But now, in the face of humanity's power, the Emperor could only look on as their empire disintegrated, knowing that the Terrans would leave nothing behind but the ashes of their once great civilization. The Terran Admiral's words rang in the Emperor's ears once more. The galaxy will remember this day, but not for the reasons you hoped. Earth has shown its power, and no one will challenge it again. The alien Emperor lowered their head, defeated. It was over. The Terrans had won. The galaxy would never be the same again as the last remnants of the alien empire crumbled. The Terran forces were relentless in their conquest. The once proud capital, a beacon of power and wealth, now lay in ruins. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble, and the streets were filled with the echoes of defeated soldiers and civilians fleeing in every direction. The sound of Terran boots marching through the streets was deafening, a constant reminder of the galaxy's new rulers. The alien Emperor, now a broken figure, sat in the heart of their shattered palace. Their throne, once a symbol of absolute power, stood empty, its once glorious gilded surface tarnished and worn. The weight of the galaxy's gaze was heavy on the Emperor's shoulders. They had been the rulers of the stars, the masters of everything they surveyed. But now, they were nothing more than a prisoner in their own home, surrounded by the destruction they had wrought. In the palace's war room, the alien generals who had once commanded great fleets now cowered before the Terran commanders. The Terran officers were cold, calculating, and unwavering. They did not seek revenge or retribution. They were here to make sure the galaxy knew exactly who held the power. The alien generals, once filled with pride and arrogance, now stood with their heads bowed, understanding that they had no choice but to accept their defeat. The Terrans had taken everything. Their fleets, their soldiers, their technology, everything had been stripped away, and now, there was nothing left but the harsh reality of their situation. The Terran Admiral, a towering figure with a face set in stone, entered the war room. His presence alone silenced the room. He had watched as his forces decimated the alien defenses, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins in their wake. Now, standing before the defeated generals, he spoke with the authority that came with the complete domination of the galaxy. "This is what happens," the Admiral said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "When you underestimate humanity, the galaxy will remember this moment, and it will remember who was responsible for your downfall." The alien generals exchanged nervous glances, their once proud faces now pale and full of fear. They had tried to stand against the Terrans, but it had been futile. They had underestimated humanity's resolve and the might of their military. Now, they were left with nothing, no way to rebuild, no way to resist. The Terrans had taken everything. The Empire was finished. The Admiral walked slowly through the war room, his gaze cold and unforgiving. "You thought you could challenge us," he continued, "but you were wrong. The Terrans don't fight for conquest or glory. We fight because we must. We fight to ensure our survival, and we fight to ensure that no one, ever dares to challenge Earth again." The alien generals stood in silence, knowing that they had no rebuttal. Their empire was gone, their power stripped away in a matter of days. The Terrans had not just defeated them, they had humiliated them. The galaxy would remember this, and no alien empire would ever rise to challenge Earth again. Outside the palace, the streets were lined with Terran soldiers, their weapons at the ready, scanning for any signs of resistance. But there was none. The alien population, once the most feared in the galaxy, had been completely subdued. Those who had fought against the Terrans were either dead or in captivity, and the rest were left to watch as their world was consumed by the Terran forces. In the distance, the Terran warships remained in orbit, casting long shadows over the planet. The massive ships, each one a symbol of humanity's military might, hovered above the wreckage below. They had done their job. They had destroyed the alien empire. And now, they would wait. As the days passed, the alien emperor, who had once sat atop the throne of the galaxy, was forced to witness the final stages of their empire's collapse. The Terrans had stripped the capital of everything of value, dismantling everything they had once built. Their technological marvels, their fleets, their cities, all were either destroyed or repurposed for the Terran cause. The Emperor had no allies left, no hope of recovery. The galaxy had moved on, and humanity had proven that they were the true power in the stars. In a final act of desperation, the alien Emperor tried one last time to send a message to the galaxy. They called upon their old allies, hoping that someone would come to their aid. But it was too late. The Terran fleet had already ensured that no one would answer. The message was received by the galaxy's various powers, but it was met with indifference. No one cared about the fate of the alien empire anymore. The galaxy had learned a new lesson. When humanity speaks, the universe listens. The Terrans had won, and the alien empire had been erased from existence. The galaxy would never forget the lessons of this day. Humanity had shown its strength, its resolve, and its unyielding determination. And the rest of the galaxy knew that they would never again challenge the Terran Empire. The age of the alien empire was over. The age of humanity had begun. The alien emperor, now a figure of nothing but shame and regret, watched as their empire was wiped from the stars. There would be no rebuilding. There would be no return. Earth had made its mark, and there was nothing left for the alien empire but silence and oblivion. As the Terran fleet prepared to depart, the message was sent across the galaxy. It was simple, direct, and filled with an unspoken promise. Humanity has arrived. And nothing will ever be the same again. The days following the collapse of the alien empire moved with an eerie, almost mechanical precision. The capital planet, once teeming with the proud civilization that had ruled the galaxy, was now a shadow of its former self. Buildings were reduced to rubble, entire districts leveled by the Terran bombardment. The alien infrastructure that had once been the pride of the Empire was now in the hands of the Terran invaders, who were carefully picking through the wreckage to salvage anything of use. There was no mercy in the way they operated, no hesitation in their actions. The Terrans were here to rebuild the galaxy in their image, and there was no room for the old order. The alien population, once living in the shadow of their empire's might, was now left to face the consequences of their rulers' decisions. As the Terran forces moved through the devastated cities, they didn't spare anyone. Civilians who had once lived under the protection of the alien regime now found themselves as prisoners in their own homes. The Terrans didn't take pleasure in their suffering, but they made it clear that there would be no sanctuary, no safe haven for those who had benefited from the Empire's cruelty. The alien emperor, now stripped of all power and influence, sat in the darkest corner of their once magnificent palace. The grandeur of the room was now a mockery. The golden walls, the luxurious furnishings, the soft glow of the chandeliers, all of it felt hollow, meaningless in the face of the Terran might that now stood over them. The Emperor, the once feared ruler of the galaxy, had been reduced to nothing. Their empire had fallen, their people had been crushed, and now they were alone, waiting for the inevitable end. The Terran admiral, whose ships had torn through the alien defenses with ruthless efficiency, stood in the Emperor's throne room. He surveyed the room with a cold, calculating gaze. He didn't need to say a word. The very presence of the Terran fleet had already delivered the message. The alien empire was finished. The admiral's task was simple: to ensure that the galaxy knew it. "You've had your time," the admiral said, his voice cold but not unkind. "Your empire is gone. The galaxy is no longer under your control. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." The alien emperor, once a symbol of invincibility, didn't look up. They had no energy left for defiance, no strength to fight back. They had given up. The emperor had led their people into war after war, driven by a desire to conquer, to dominate, to control. But now, that ambition had led them to ruin. They had thought their power was unbreakable. They had underestimated humanity. The Terran admiral watched the emperor closely, his eyes sharp, his expression unreadable. He had heard the stories about the alien empire's cruelty, the way they had enslaved entire species, crushed their enemies without mercy. The Terrans didn't seek revenge, they sought order. And in their view, the galaxy could never know true peace until the alien empire had been erased from existence. You will live to see the consequences of your empire's actions, the admiral continued. Your people will rebuild, but they will never forget who brought this destruction upon them. The alien emperor's eyes flickered with a faint spark of defiance, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. They had no more soldiers to command, no more fleets to lead. They were a figurehead, nothing more. The Terrans had not just destroyed their empire. They had destroyed the idea that any power could ever stand against humanity's will. Outside, the Terran fleet hovered, their massive ships casting long shadows over the ruined cities. The air was thick with tension as the rest of the galaxy awaited the Terran next move. Would they leave, satisfied with their victory? Or would they continue their conquest, spreading their influence across the stars? The answer came swiftly. As the admiral finished speaking, the Terran warships moved into formation, prepared to depart. The alien empire, now nothing more than a memory, would no longer exist as a threat to the galaxy. The Terrans were not here to rule with fear, but with dominance. They would allow no challenge to their authority, no uprising to defy their strength. The galaxy would know the Terrans were not just a species. They were a force of nature, impossible to stop. As the final moments of the alien empire's reign drew to a close, the Terran fleet broadcast one last message to the galaxy. It was a simple message, but it carried with it the weight of an entire civilization's downfall. Earth has arrived, the message echoed across the stars. And we are here to stay. The galaxy, once divided by warring empires, now understood that the age of the alien empire had come to an end. The Terrans had shown their might, and with it, they had set a new order in motion. There would be no more wars between empires, only peace, under the rule of humanity. The alien emperor, their face etched with regret, watched as the Terran fleet disappeared into the stars. The end had come. The era of the alien empire was over, and the era of humanity had begun. There would be no going back, no redemption. The galaxy would be shaped by the hands of those who had once been underestimated, Earth's Terran deathwelders. And as the Emperor sank deeper into despair, they realized the truth. Humanity had not only won, they had rewritten the rules of the galaxy, and no one would ever challenge them again. The galaxy, once a tapestry of interstellar empires, now found itself irrevocably altered by the Terran invasion. The alien empire that had once dominated countless star systems had vanished, reduced to nothing more than a forgotten chapter in the galaxy's history. In the aftermath of their swift and absolute victory, the Terrans had become the new rulers of the stars. Their dominance was not marked by treaties or negotiations. It was sealed by the overwhelming power of their fleet, their technology, and their resolve. The alien emperor, now a prisoner in their own crumbling palace, watched as the final pieces of their once glorious empire were stripped away. The Terran forces had gone beyond simply defeating them. They had erased every trace of the Empire's influence from the galaxy. The alien fleet, once the terror of the stars, had been obliterated. Their colonies, their worlds, their people, everything they had built was now under the control of humanity. Outside the ruined capital, the Terran fleet remained in orbit, an unblinking eye watching over the ashes of the Empire. The ships, massive and unyielding, were a constant reminder that the galaxy had been reshaped by Earth's power. For the first time in history, no one questioned who was in control. The Terrans had not only conquered the alien empire, they had sent a clear message to every other species in the galaxy: never underestimate humanity. In the halls of the shattered palace, the last remnants of the alien leadership were forced into submission. They had once held the galaxy in the palm of their hands, their fleets and armies feared by every other civilization. Now, they were nothing more than prisoners, their voices silenced by the overwhelming presence of the Terran commanders. The Terrans had not taken prisoners for mercy, they had taken them for one purpose: to remind the galaxy that no one was safe from Earth's wrath. The Terran admiral stood before the alien generals, his expression unyielding as they knelt before him. He had seen the destruction his fleet had wrought, but there was no satisfaction in his eyes. For the Terrans, this was not a conquest to be celebrated. It was a necessary step in ensuring that humanity would never again be threatened by those who had believed they were invincible. "You've had your time," the admiral said coldly, his voice carrying through the room like a final decree. You thought you could rule the galaxy with fear, but now you will see what true power looks like. The alien generals, once proud and haughty, now stared at the floor in defeat. They had fought and bled for a cause that had already been lost. The Terrans had crushed them with such precision, such overwhelming force, that there was nothing left to resist. The warships that had once been their pride were now reduced to floating wrecks in the void. The alien fleet had been shattered, and their enemies, humans, stood triumphant. "We didn't come for your submission," the Admiral continued. "We came to remind you, and everyone else, that the galaxy has a new master. There will be no rebellion. There will be no uprising. The Terrans will not be moved." In the corner of the room, the alien emperor looked on in silence. The weight of their failure was suffocating. They had once commanded armies, once wielded unimaginable power, but now they were reduced to nothing. The Terrans hadn't just defeated them. They had crushed the very idea that any species could stand against humanity. The Emperor's eyes, once filled with the arrogance of a ruler at the height of their power, now reflected the bitter truth: humanity had won. Outside, the galaxy's other powers were watching in stunned silence. The news of the Terran conquest spread like wildfire across the stars. No one knew how to respond. The alien empire had been the most formidable force the galaxy had ever known, and if they could be defeated so swiftly, then who was safe? Who could stand against the Terrans? The galaxy's other empires, once distant from one another, now found themselves in a delicate balance. Some began to see the Terrans as a necessary ally, hoping to avoid their wrath. Others, more stubborn, began to consider how they might resist, but they knew that challenging humanity would be a mistake. The lesson had been learned. The Terrans were not to be trifled with. Back in the capital, the last of the alien generals were taken away in chains, their fates sealed by the Admiral's command. The Terrans had no need for prisoners. They were a species that operated on action, not idle threats. Every word they spoke was followed by the sound of warships firing, of cities falling, of empires crumbling. The Terran Admiral, standing over the ruined palace of the alien emperor, looked out over the horizon. The stars were quiet now. The galaxy was still. There would be no more wars of this kind. No more empires that could challenge the Terrans. Earth had proven its might, and now the galaxy would live in the shadow of humanity's strength. The Emperor, now a broken figure in the dimly lit room, had no words left to say. The last echoes of their reign had faded away, replaced by the quiet, oppressive silence of their fall. They had been a ruler, a conqueror, but now they were nothing more than a footnote in the history of a much stronger power. And in that silence, the Terran Admiral's voice echoed once more: "This is the end of an era, and the beginning of humanity's reign." The alien emperor's heart sank, the weight of those words heavy in their chest. They knew it was true. The galaxy would never be the same again. And Earth, humanity, had taken its place at the top. In the distance, the Terran warships began their long journey back into the stars. They had not come for glory, or for riches, or for power. They had come to show the galaxy that humanity would never again be forgotten. And as they disappeared into the void, the galaxy knew one undeniable truth. The Terrans had arrived, and they were not leaving. The Terran fleet, a massive and imposing presence in the galaxy, drifted silently through the stars, leaving the remnants of the alien empire behind. The once mighty civilization had been broken, its power shattered by the overwhelming might of humanity. The capital planet was now a wasteland, its streets silent, its cities in ruins. The galaxy had witnessed the fall of an empire, and the rise of something new, a power that no one could ignore. In the wake of the conquest, the Terrans did not celebrate their victory. There were no parades or public displays of triumph. The Terran military was efficient, focused, and methodical. They had come not for glory, but for control. Earth had made its mark on the galaxy, and now it was time to ensure that no one would ever again question their power. Back on Earth, the Terran High Command met in a vast, sterile conference room. The room was quiet, but the weight of the discussions held within it was immense. The galaxy had been changed forever, and now it was up to humanity to decide what came next. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What would they do with the galaxy now that it was theirs? The High Command was made up of the brightest minds in Terran military and political leadership. They had overseen the conquest of the alien empire, and now they were tasked with ensuring that the galaxy remained under humanity's control. It was a delicate balance. The galaxy was vast, with countless civilizations and species, some of which were more advanced than others. The Terrans knew that their dominance would not be easy to maintain, but they were determined to ensure that humanity's rule was absolute. The Admiral, who had led the Terran fleet to victory, stood at the head of the table. His face was hard, his expression focused. There was no satisfaction in his demeanor, no sense of accomplishment. His task was not done. The galaxy had been conquered, but the work of maintaining control was just beginning. "We've shattered the alien empire," the Admiral said, his voice steady and commanding. "But this is just the beginning. We've shown the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated. Now we must ensure that no one dares to challenge us again." The room fell silent as the leaders of the High Command exchanged glances. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that the Terrans had proven their strength. The alien empire had been defeated with swift and overwhelming force, and now the galaxy understood that humanity was not a species to be trifled with. But the question of what came next was far from simple. "We need to establish our presence across the galaxy," the Admiral continued. "We've already begun to consolidate control over the aliens' former territories. But we must move quickly before other empires decide to test us. The galaxy is still full of uncertainties." The political leaders nodded in agreement. They understood that this was not a time for hesitation. The Terrans had made their mark, but the galaxy was vast and filled with potential threats. There were other powerful empires, and even if they had witnessed the fall of the alien empire, they might still consider testing humanity's resolve. The Terrans could not afford to let their guard down. "We will begin diplomatic outreach," one of the senior diplomats suggested, his voice cautious. "But we must be clear. We offer no deals, no negotiations. The galaxy must understand that humanity is the supreme power now. Any resistance will be crushed." The Admiral nodded approvingly. The Terrans had no need for diplomacy if it meant weakness. Their strength was their greatest asset, and they would use it to dominate. The galaxy had already seen what happened when they challenged humanity. Now they would see what happened when they tried to resist. "We also need to send a message to the other galactic powers," the Admiral said. "We have proven our might, but we cannot rely on our victories alone. We need to establish a permanent military presence in key systems, and we must ensure that our fleets are always ready to respond to any threat. This is not just about showing strength, it's about maintaining control. We will not allow any power to rise that could threaten Earth's supremacy." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement. The Terrans had already proven that they were capable of overwhelming force, but now they had to ensure that no one ever forgot it. The galaxy had to understand that Earth was now the center of power in the universe, and no one could challenge that. "We also need to focus on rebuilding," one of the scientists in the room added. "The alien empire's technology is advanced, but there are gaps. We can learn from their mistakes and strengthen our own capabilities. We must ensure that humanity is the dominant power, not just in military strength, but in every aspect." The Admiral glanced at the scientist, his eyes cold. "We will rebuild, but not for peace. We will rebuild to reinforce our dominance." And with that, the meeting concluded. The decisions had been made. The Terrans would not simply rule, they would reshape the galaxy in their image. Every star system, every planet, would be brought under their control. There would be no room for resistance. The galaxy would either bend to humanity's will or face complete annihilation. Back on the ruined capital of the alien empire, the last traces of resistance had finally been wiped out. The Terran soldiers patrolled the streets, ensuring that there were no lingering threats. The alien emperor, once a figure of immense power, was now confined to a prison cell, left to contemplate the ruins of their empire. They had begged for help, only to be shown the true cost of underestimating humanity. As the Terran fleet prepared for their next move, the galaxy began to realize that the balance of power had shifted forever. Earth had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again.